Hi, I'm Hollie Arnulphy from the Hong Kong International Literary Festival, and I'm here with best-selling author Emily St John Mandel. It's nice to meet you, Emily. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and your writing?
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for interviewing me. I'm so looking forward to coming to Hong Kong. What can I tell you? I'm originally from Canada. I've lived in New York City for most of my adult life, and now I also spend quite a bit of time in Los Angeles, so I'm constantly going back and forth. Um, I've written six novels. The most recent is called Sea of Tranquility. And yeah, I have a daughter. She's 7. And what else can I tell you? More about my writing. Literary fiction. I sometimes tend a little bit towards science fiction and detective fiction. I've always loved the noir genre. And lately I've begun working a little bit in television on an adaptation of my novel, The Glass Hotel, and then also on other unrelated TV projects. It's a form of writing that I really enjoy.
Excellent, thank you. You began writing your first book, Last Night in Montreal, when you were 22, is that correct?
That is correct.
In,
Yeah.
in 2002.
Yes.
Did you always want to be an author?
No, I wanted to be a dancer. That was my first career. So when I was a child, I trained fairly intensively, ultimately, in ballet. And then I went to school for contemporary dance. I went to the School of Toronto Dance Theatre in Canada. It was this very intensive conservatory program in dance. And, I loved dance for a very long time. And then around the time I was about 21 or 22, I found that I just had fallen out of love with it. It was kind of interesting. It was like something that had had hold of me for a long time, had suddenly let go. And I found I just didn't really want to dance anymore, which begged the obvious question, well, now what? When I was a child, I was homeschooled. My parents were hippies, and the schools in our area were not great. So they kept me home for kindergarten as an experiment, and then that experiment somehow lasted about 10 years. And there was a period of time when I was about 8 or 9 years old when I had to write something every day. That was part of the curriculum. So I'd been in the habit of writing from an early age. And then when I reached my early 20s and didn't want to be a dancer anymore, I thought, well, maybe that's something that I could do, that I could take more seriously. And it was a gradual process of going from thinking of it as really just a hobby that I did in my spare time to making it more of the focus of my life. And I began writing what eventually became my first novel, Last Night in Montreal.
Great. Wow. So your 2014 novel, Station 11, which is one of my favorites,
Thank you.
about a post-pandemic world, it was a huge success. Can you tell me how the novel came about and how do you think it affected your view of our COVID-19 pandemic when it happened?
Um, it's funny. I did not originally intend to write a pandemic novel. The way Station 11 came about was so that was my fourth novel. I'd written three novels, which, genre can be such a slippery question. I thought of them as literary fiction, but there was absolutely a detective slash crime fiction element to them. And I thought, well, if I continue in this vein indefinitely, I'll be categorized as a crime writer. And that's a little bit delicate to express because I do very much like crime fiction and have tremendous respect for what crime writers do. But once you get caught in those little marketing boxes, it can be very hard to get out. So I thought, I'm going to write something completely different. I'm going to write a quiet literary novel about the lives of actors and musicians in a traveling company. I was going to set it in present day Canada. But there was something that I've been thinking about for a while around that time. This would have been 2011, 2012, and thinking about how best to express, which was a sense of awe that I felt and actually still feel about the world that we live in, which, our world is obviously often horrible, but also we're living in this age of miracles where you can do things like dial a series of numbers on a supercomputer that fits in your pocket, and that will result in a signal being beamed to the satellites and back down to almost anywhere on Earth. Um, when I come to Hong Kong, that will take a number of hours versus weeks, as it would have in past
Yeah.
centuries. So it seemed to me that maybe an interesting way to write about the modern world would be to contemplate its absence. So I decided to keep that original idea of the traveling theater company, but set it in a post-apocalyptic, post-technological world. And this sounds strange to say now, but the pandemic that ends the world in Station 11 was almost incidental to the project. I just, this makes me sound a bit heartless, but I just had to end the world somehow, to get to this post-technological time that I
Yeah.
wanted to write about. So I thought, well, a pandemic would be a horribly effective way to do that. I was not prepared in any way for the COVID-19 pandemic. I should have been. I'd spent the previous 5 years traveling around the United States, giving a lecture about Station 11 that literally contained the phrase, "There will always be another pandemic." And yet, I'm embarrassed to admit I was as blindsided as anyone. I think it's one thing to know intellectually that there will always be another pandemic, and something else to live through it.
Yeah, wow, that's fascinating. So interesting. Thank you. Um, so The Glass Hotel was on Barack Obama's list of favorite books in 2020. How did that make you feel?
It was wonderful. I have tremendous admiration for Obama, and that list means a lot. It really does.
Yeah, brilliant. So let's go back to your latest book that you
Mhm.
briefly mentioned, Sea of Tranquility, which explores the theme of time travel. Why do you think writing in this speculative, you talked about your genre, and it is difficult to place your writing, I find, because
Mhm.
it's so broad, and I call it human interest, but that doesn't really
Right.
cover it. Um, but why do you think writing in the speculative fiction genre appeals to you so much?
It's fun, honestly.
Right,
It's that's a big part of it. It's really fun making up entire worlds, I have to say. And I think one does that to an extent, anytime you sit down and write a piece of fiction, you do have to kind of invent this whole reality, kind of. But speculative fiction just takes that to a completely other level in a way that I personally really enjoy. It's,
right.
there are some very human concerns around distance and time and regret and travel and things that I think can be expressed very elegantly in the speculative fiction genre. Um,
Right.
yeah, it's also just a genre that I love as a reader. I've read
Mm.
so much science fiction, and it's something I really enjoy.
Right, excellent. Thank you. So you'll be joining us at the Hong Kong International Literary Festival on Sunday, the 12th of March, I believe between 2 and 3 p.m. I might not have
Yes,
got that right.
exactly.
It
Yep.
is available for booking on the website. Just a little plug there. Can you tell us about your event?
Yes, I'm going to be interviewed on stage, and which is my absolute favorite format, by the way. I love the conversation events where I just get up there and talk to somebody, and it's always really interesting. I'm hoping there'll be time for questions from the audience as well. But yeah, I believe the mandate is quite broad. We'll talk about Sea of Tranquility specifically, my most recent novel, but also about writing more generally. And and I don't know what else, because that is one of my favorite things about that format is the conversation can really go in any direction in a way that can be really quite fun.
Excellent, thank you. So finally, just to let everybody know that Emily's books are available in Hong Kong's Bookazine stores, so pick up your copies before you come to our talk. Bookazine is our partner for the festival, and we thank them for having all their books on hand for us. So thank you so much for joining me, Emily, and I really look forward to meeting you in March.
Thank you. I can't wait to come to Hong Kong. It'll be lovely.